All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Elevate Your Equity podcast, where investors, with a special emphasis on couples, begin, continue, and deepen their journey to financial freedom together using the powerful vehicle of real estate investing to do so. And today, we have got such a treat for you guys. Oh my gosh, what a great show. We just spoke with a very experienced real estate investor for over 30 years, Mr. Michael Morawski. And Michael Morawski is a real estate investment veteran. He's controlled over $285 million in real estate transactions. And he's an entrepreneur, author, real estate trainer, public speaker, and personal coach with a strong personal resilience and deep desire to help others live an extraordinary life. He's coached hundreds of real estate investors in fulfilling their dreams with passive income in real estate. In his background, he began as a general contractor in the northwest suburbs of Chicago with $5 million in annual revenues. And then he sold his company. Then he entered the real estate industry as a sales agent and then moved into multifamily apartments, building to $60 million with 4,000 units in 5 different markets. And now, today, Michael's passion is giving back his wisdom and teaching others in his Insider Secrets podcast and being the co-host of his Multifamily Unplugged video cast that you can view on Facebook. And he also built recently something called My Core Intentions, which is a training coaching platform for real estate investors and industry professionals. And his core principle there is to teach his clients how to create short-term cash flow and long-term wealth. And so this show was very powerful on many levels. I almost was choking up there at a few points in the podcast. It's just really, really good stuff. But he had such great tactics, things that people can tangibly use right now, no matter what your experience level. He talks about criteria he used to buy properties, but more importantly than that, he talked about mindset and how important it is to really have yourself good in between the ears.
Yeah, it's honestly still reeling our show with him because he's not only so wise and full of experiences, but he is also so grounded at the same time. And his words actually transcend real estate investing. It transcends just his words are so powerful for life. And I really, really urge you to just listen to his whole story, listen to it from beginning to end, and press pause where you really need to press pause to see where his words land within you, because I guarantee you, in some form or fashion, they will change you.
Yeah, and man, the power in this is fantastic. Very introspective, and hopefully gets you to think a little bit. But that being said, I think it's time that we bring him on instead of talk about it, right? So let's bring on Mike Morawski. All right, Mike, thank you so much for being on the podcast. It's an honor to have you here. How are you today?
I'm doing great. It's really great to be here, actually. So thanks for having me on.
Absolutely. Yes. And thank you so much for taking the time to come on. I know we're going to really enjoy this, and some of the audience out there is going to really enjoy and relate with your story too. So let's just jump right into it. So Mike, you have a pretty diverse background of experience in multifamily and everything. How did all this start? How did you get started in multifamily?
I was in the residential real estate business and went into multifamily. But I think that, even before that, I had made a decision that I wanted to be in real estate. I had a general contracting business, woke up one morning and was just burnt out. Couldn't do it anymore. I was still banging nails, doing $5 million worth of volume a year. I was just tired, and looked at my wife at the time and I said, hey, I'm done. And we sold the company, and I went into real estate, took a year off, made a decision to go into real estate, went into real estate and sold single family houses. I built a team where we were selling about 125 homes a year. Then I went into the apartment business in 2005. Saw the market was softening, knew that I would have to go do something else to keep the same lifestyle that we were living. So I'd always wanted to be in the apartment business. Back when I was in the construction business, I did a lot of work for Inland Real Estate. And Inland, is one of the largest REITs in the world right now. And a REIT is a real estate investment trust, like a mutual fund where you can put money in. It's more liquid than your typical real estate investment. And so I knew you could be successful, and I knew the model and I understood it. So made a decision to go and start raising some private equity, raised about $18 million in 30 months, and bought $60 million worth of real estate. It was about 4,000 apartments in 5 different states, and built a property management company managing about 7,500 units.
Let's back up a little bit, because you seem to have mentioned it as if it was, no big feat, right? Like we've kind of glossed over it as if it was something that was just kind of happened in life. It was like a blip, right? But this is a huge deal, right? There's a lot of information, a lot of stuff to go over here. So I want to get back to the beginning, right? When you're in a single family home, you're doing the single family home business. You said that you'd always been interested in multifamily, but where did that come from? Let's go into that. Like, where did you find out about multifamily, and what did you see that was different between multifamily and the single family?
I think it's really interesting what you just said, though, Derek, about, you kind of glossed over it like it was just no big deal, right? And it was just a blip. And I think we do that, especially when you have a lot of experience in something, whether it's technology or real estate or wherever. You kind of just assume that other people get it, and you just kind of run by it, right? Or you just are so humble that you just don't brag about it, right? It's interesting that you caught that and brought that up. So listen, I have 2 stories to answer that question.
Okay.
One is, I always tell this, that I was 8 years old, sitting on the side of a swimming pool with my dad, and we were on family vacation. We're at this resort. I couldn't even tell you where we were at. And I'm asking my dad about the resort we're staying at, and how come there's so many rooms and doors. I did not come from a real estate background at all. My family really didn't understand it, probably still doesn't understand it. And said, my dad in his infinite wisdom is trying to tell me, well, people come here and they stay here, they travel and pay the owner money. And right from that moment on, I knew I wanted to be the owner and was going to get paid all the money. And that always stuck with me. So I can even remember growing up, driving around, asking my mom or my dad, hey, who owns that big building? Who owns that big building? And they used to say insurance company. So I'll never forget the first time I did an institutional deal with an insurance company, right? And they I was like, wow, that came full circle, that whole deal.
Yeah.
Kind of funny. But really where I really got my biggest passion was, I was in the construction business and did a lot of work for Inland Real Estate and for Equity Trust. Being based in Chicago, they were 2 of the big multifamily syndicators, operators, and I did a lot of work on apartments for years for both those companies. And I watched the model. I watched how they built it. I understood that you raise private equity, you match it with a good real estate deal, you stay in the middle, you run it, you operate it. As long as everything goes okay, everybody makes money.
Yeah, no, that's great. Thank you, Mike. And again, I want to give you a little bit more credit here too, because the way that you're explaining this, it seems so logical, right? And generally when people are starting out, like nowadays, there's so much information out there. So it kind of is possible for someone to take the logical route. When Sophie's family started investing in real estate back, in the early 90s, in the early 90s in the United States, coming from another country, there was no manual. The only way that you were able to find answers was if you knew to ask questions. It wasn't, we didn't have the internet at our fingertips. You couldn't just find this all out. So what were some of the earlier mentors or the people that helped funnel you into all this knowledge?
Well, that's interesting. Really interesting question. So first of all, I heard a long time ago, success leaves clues. And that always stuck with me. And I always knew that if I wanted to progress or wanted to get better at something, that I needed to go seek out the answer and educate. I read 1,000 books over probably 20 years about business and, how to build businesses, and biographies about successful people. And, when you read a biography of Steve Jobs or Colin Powell or, someone who's done something before you that just has really, it makes sense to you, you pick up little nuggets along the way. So that success has always left clues, right? That kind of answer that?
It did. Although I was looking for a little bit more on like the mechanics, right? Did you find a mentor or someone that helped teach you how multifamily, like even the basics right now of understanding the, NOI, how that works with valuations paired with cap rate, some of those technical things? Is that where that came from as well, by listening to some people in that space?
So what's interesting is back then there were no podcasts, right? And there was very limited, there probably wasn't even any Google.
That's
So
right.
a lot.
Yeah.
What are you saying? I'm old?
I didn't say
kidding.
it. I'm just kidding.
I'm just kidding.
You have a lot of experience. That's the way that I like to put it.
See, the gray hair is wisdom, right? Two things happened. One is when I first went into the real estate business as a sales agent, I knew nothing. So I went and sought out a top real estate agent in the area and asked him to teach me. And he made me a cassette tape that I listened to over and over and over again, just like a podcast you would today. And I listened to that information and I implemented those systems and techniques. My first 8 months in the business, I sold 78 houses because I did what somebody else successful had done. Now, as far as when I went in the apartment business, I knew I had an idea, but I didn't really know. And I didn't know anybody else who had done it. I had seen these companies from a distance and I just logically understood the model, right? So, it was a basic concept, Eric. Hey, raise money from private individuals, and you can't do it if they're not accredited, and you can't do it publicly. You have to do it privately, right? So I understood those basics. And I understood, hey, go find a good real estate deal. And what's a good real estate deal? It's a multi-unit deal that needs some work. It's a value add. And let's go do that and reinvent it, re-engineer it, put it back on the market, run it, operate it, sell it. I don't know. So what happened was the first deal I did, I knew nothing, right? And there were no early trap evaluations. So I didn't look at things like household income, and I didn't look at things like school districts or demographics. I didn't go to the police department and ask for a crime report. And I bought this deal based on what the seller said, which was, oh, this is a great deal. You should buy this, and you'll be able to raise the rents, and you put a little bit of money in, you're going to do fine. And I was so excited, right? I don't know if I was excited about buying the deal or how I raised the private equity, which is a whole other story. But I owned that deal and bought it, and it wasn't but a week that I said, oh man, I made a terrible mistake. And I realized I wasn't going to be able to make money in the Chicago market, right? I called my broker up at the time and I said, hey, Ryan, I said, we need to do something different. I said, we need to sit down and write out a plan. And I don't know where this came from. Honestly, I just said, here's what I need is I need a strategy. I need a buying strategy. What I will buy and what I won't buy and what I won't settle for and what I won't go below. And we built this list. And the early list was pretty easy, right? It was market rate rent, Class B deals, price range, 40,000 to 80,000 all in. Back then you could do deals like that were Class B.
Wow.
And markets that were warm, and I could golf a little bit longer in the year and didn't have to shovel snow. So that was pretty much my early buying strategy, right? So we started to look in. First place that we did go was into the Ohio Valley, bought a couple of deals in Indianapolis, Cincinnati, probably bought about 1,800 units in that market. Went down to Alabama because I had an agent on my team who sold residential with me, and her and her husband moved to Huntsville, Alabama, and she called me one day and said, you should look at the real estate in this market. And we did, and we proceeded, and we bought about 800 units in the Huntsville, Decatur, Alabama market in northern Alabama. They worked out really well, right? But we had this strategy. So the strategy grew, and it was garden level, 2 to 3 story, interior entrances. We had to have enough parking for 1.5 cars per unit. We wanted to make sure that we had laundry facilities and pitched roofs. I didn't like flat roofs, and they needed to be asphalt. And I really didn't care for outside balconies, but we did do a couple of them. I wanted to buy units that had model apartments. I don't know what that was about it, but we bought, so we were buying 200, 300, 400 unit apartment complexes.
That's great. So thank you so much for sharing the story about how you scaled up. I wanted to go back and ask a question about the first one that you said, right? This is because this is where a lot of our listeners are probably going to be at, right? The first one almost always never seems to work out right. Even in the single family realm, like there's enthusiasm. You're like, oh my gosh, this is so great. I'm excited to do this, right? And you find out soon enough that in business, the value of a building is also worth the amount that someone will pay for it. And if you don't know what you're doing, then the value of the building is very high and you end up buying high. So my question is, after the first one seemed to not go over so well, what kept you going? I know obviously, the end result was that you ended up with all these apartment complexes. You developed very rigorous criteria that a lot of successful syndicators and multifamily investors end up with just out of experience, knowing what you want to do, what you don't want to do. And that's what you walked us through, which is still eerily very, very applicable today.
Here's how I equate the multifamily business. Do you ride a motorcycle by chance?
I do not, but I've always wanted to try it.
So I'm a Harley rider. And about springtime, so early March, middle of March, you start to see a few bikes on the road and that fever starts. It's like, oh man, I'm going to need to get my bike out. I'm going to need to go for a ride. It's kind of a passion thing, right? It's like this burning desire. I don't know where it happened along the line, Derek, but that's how I am with multifamily. I love the apartment business. I love the deal. I love negotiating the deal. I love re-engineering the deal. One of the things that I really have a passion for, and I always have, and I've always said, I want to provide safe, secure housing for single parents. Whether they were a single mom or a single dad, they had kids that were coming home from school, probably a latchkey by themselves. I wanted to provide an environment that was safe and secure for those kids and those single parents. Don't ask me where it came from, but I just have always had this passion, and I've had this passion for multifamily. Like I said, when I was 8 years old, I got bit by the bug, and it just kind of has always stuck with me. When I was in the construction business and I did all that work for those apartment syndicators, I just knew that I was going to go in that business and be in that business. That's where I wound up, was in that business. I really think that things happen in our lives because we manifest them, because we think about them over time, we believe them, we visualize them, and think about things in your life that you have. Hey, if you want a new refrigerator, you don't just go out and buy the new refrigerator. You've thought about it, the other one's breaking down, it's starting to get old, it's worn, and there's a new model, this one talks to you, and all of a sudden a new refrigerator shows up at the house. So it's kind of the same way, you think about these things over time and you decide, this is what I'm going to go do.
That's great. I think everyone here that's listening on the podcast right now, it's as simple as what Mike is just talking about right now. You decide what you want to do by pulling from some of your passions. And the good news is that in multifamily real estate, it's always a team sport. And that means that there's a lot of jobs to do. And so whatever it is that you like to do, no matter what skill you have, there is some niche that you can fill or some role that you can play in multifamily investing. And then just sticking with that, keeping the vision. And, I know, Mike, you said that you wanted to be in multifamily real estate, ever since you were young. That helps remind our listeners and me that if you just have that vision, right, the consistency to keep with one thing, you can really hit the top of the top of the top of the top of performers in the United States or even in the world. And so you've definitely exemplified that. So thank you.
I just want to comment on a couple of things. You had asked me, you said, how did you learn about these things, NOI and cap rate and things like that. Right. What happened along the way was I would seek people out. And I used my broker as a sounding board, and I would ask him questions. If I couldn't get a clear answer, I'd ask him who else I could talk to. There were a number of economists that I would go talk to about forecasts and looking at numbers. There were people that taught me what NOI was. There were people who taught me what cap rate was, how to figure it, what it meant, how it worked. There were people who taught me about effective gross income and why that was important. Best lessons I ever learned was the difference between physical and economic occupancy. I think everybody just figures vacancy or occupancy, right, is one line item, and it's not. And then one of the things that I really love is operating out of the box and finding other ways to create income and source income in a property. As simple as putting a vending machine in a laundry room, or as simple as creating revenue on some parking spots in a parking lot near close to the door because people want to park closer, right? So it's those things that, how do we think outside the box to create more revenue for the property and increase the revenue? Because it doesn't always have to be about raising the rent. And that goes back to the planning, right? Exit planning. So I keep thinking about this situation that I want to talk about. So my partner and I go look at a deal one time, and we had got our first deal closed. We had rewritten this criteria. We were working on closing our second deal, which was in Indiana, but we went to look at something probably 40 minutes from the office. And we drove out, and on the way back, we had to stop at the store and buy a couple more legal pads because he drove, and on the way back, I hand wrote the scenario out. I went through 10 years of projections and rent increases and capital improvements and what it would cost us. And, my construction background, I think, helped with that. But I went through 5 legal pads.
Wow.
On those projections to get to the end and go, we're not buying this deal. So, wow. Because I walked through year after year and different scenarios to figure out, is this going to work or not work? So that was a great experience for me because I learned a lot from that, right?
Yeah, thank you for that. Oh man. So there's so much gold in here. I think that for me, I'm going to say what I have to say, and then I'm going to let Sophie talk too, because she's dying to ask a question. I kind of get carried away. All of the people that are listening out there, right? They're probably looking at deals, maybe they're analyzing stuff, and they're maybe getting frustrated. They're maybe getting to the point where, man, like I just can't find, like the numbers just don't seem to work, especially nowadays, right? Because multifamily is caught on. There's all this cap rate compression that's happening. What would you say to someone who's just starting out, who is encountering that problem, given the fact that you spent probably hours and hours doing things by hand, and now we have, electronic tools? What would you say to those people who are just starting out and can't find success?
Great question. Success is out there. You go make your own.
Yeah.
So what I would say is go find an off-market deal. Go find a seller that nobody's talking to yet. Go find sellers that are thinking that in a few months from now or a year from now, they're going to sell their deal. Get in front of sellers that have property that they're going to sell that they don't even know they're going to sell you. So you go make your own success. Don't depend on anybody else. Don't, just because all the smart money's buying in this market or that market, there's still deals to be had in those markets.
I can't agree with you more. The creativity is what's going to make it happen. But I'm going to let Sophie ask a question now because I have a couple others to ask you too, but I got to take a step back.
Thank you so much for sharing your story. Like Derek was saying, so much gold and wisdom through everything that you shared with us so far. And I think what our listeners perhaps unconsciously or maybe consciously already hearing is that interwoven through what you shared so far, there is a lot of tenacity. There is a lot of resilience. What I'm hearing is that there's this mindset that's framing this massive success that's guided your journey. And I want to hear more about the inner workings of your mindset when you first start out and your mindset now. And what can you tell our listeners of how to continue to develop that to get to a level of success and fulfillment that you're experiencing now?
And Sophie, I have to say that you said 2 words that I always find intriguing when people say these, right? So resilience, one thing, because how do we come back from stubbing our toe or falling or nicking our knee, right? How do we come back? Because it's not if you're going to, but it's when you're going to. Because there's always going to be a struggle in somebody's life. In somebody's life, they're going to be stronger, deeper, harder struggles than in others, right? And we can talk about some of mine if you want to do that. But the other thing that you said was the tenacity, right? Somebody said to me one time, I probably was in real estate 3 years, and a client said to me, Morawski, you are so tenacious. And I thought to myself, I was very gracious about it. I said, thanks, I appreciate that. Kind of laughed it off, ran right home to a dictionary to look it up because I didn't know what it meant. And when I read the definition, I said, man, my picture should be next to this, because that's how I am, is I have this mentality that I'm going to go make things happen. Regardless of the situation, regardless of what's going on in my life, I'll go make things happen. I don't know, it doesn't always work out, but I go after it. I am very tenacious though. Like if I was going after a listing or going after a seller and they weren't ready right now, that I understand that it takes somewhere between 7, and I just heard a statistic today, 16 times for somebody to see your message, be touched by you, asked if they want to buy, asked if they want to sell, 16 times. Now, let me ask you, how many people around you are willing to ask a seller if he wants to sell his property to them 16 times before they find a decent off-market deal? So I say that because I'm convinced there's a ton of opportunity out there for me. So when I hit the game again, it's like that Harley fever that I talked about, the passion is back, right? So when I get back there again, I know that I'll find those deals.
Yeah, thank you so much, Mike. Again, just so much wisdom. And you mentioned that, there were those times that perhaps maybe you didn't feel like you could bounce back from. If you feel comfortable, would you be willing to share some of those times and how you found it within you to rise up again?
So that's interesting. So let's just, for transparency purposes, tell the rest of this story, right? So 2005, went in the apartment business, raised $18 million, bought 4,000 apartments. And in 2010, my company imploded. And it imploded because we were over leveraged. We bought too many properties too fast. We were unstable. The growth was not what we thought it would be. We couldn't get, I had an operations guy that wasn't executing like he should be executing, telling me that he was, and I was burying my head in the sand, not looking at enough reports, not really seeing what was going on. So we imploded as a company, and at that point we had 4,000 apartments, 5 different states, about $40 million in debt. And the market, what happened in 2008, the market hit a wall, and the whole world went sideways, upside down. And if you didn't have the strength to stand it, you weren't going to. And one of our biggest problems was we were over leveraged. So I was in all my deals 10 to 15%. And I owned $60 million worth of real estate at 15% down. So I was 85% loan to value, and I couldn't withstand the storm when it came. So I would advise anybody, and this is one of the biggest points that I'll make, do not buy any real estate unless you're 25 to 30% down payment and have 70 to 75% loan to value. Some deals that I could pencil today, I would pencil at 50% loan to value. Some of the other things would make sure you raise enough money. I didn't raise enough money. We were very unstable. So I bought 17 deals in 2007. We closed 2,700 apartments. And instead of stabilizing a deal and making sure management had it under control and things were right, we went right on to the next deal, bought the next deal. And very unhealthy, chaotic acquisition style. So that whole acquisition style would need to be reworked, right? Re-engineered. As a result of those challenges, we hit a wall, imploded, and I wound up being charged with wire fraud and mail fraud charges, got sentenced to 10 years in federal prison, and went off and served, just finished about 8 years.
My gosh, how powerful. I got a lot to unpack here, as usual.
Let me just clarify one thing if I can. So what happened was we were so over leveraged. We had companies that were running well. I had 38 companies. Some were running well, some were running poorly. I moved money between companies. That's what wasn't so much illegal. See, I had companies that were going to go to foreclosure, and I didn't want the investors to get hurt. So I thought, you know what? I've never seen a real estate correction more than 10%. It lasts a short time. It'll bounce back. Let's move money from the unhealthy companies, from the healthy companies into the unhealthy companies. Right the ship, ride the storm out, and when things come back, we'll pull all the bandages off and fix it. Well, that was fine, but I didn't disclose it to my investors. We had a 40% switch in the marketplace, and it was unrecoverable.
Yeah, especially when you're over leveraged that much, I can see how that could probably start imploding really quickly. And so thank you for being transparent and open about this experience. I know it's not an easy one because it led to, change the course of your life. I know that.
Oh, yeah.
Let me ask you another thing too, because again, we try to, here on Elevate Your Equity, we try to make sure that we're looking at the individual as an entire whole throughout every process of growth, right? And one of the things that doesn't get mentioned too much, or maybe the listener may not even know to ask the question, but while this is all going on, how is the home life looking? I mean, at this point in time, right? Like you've got to be starting to see the writing on the wall at some point, right? When you guys are over leveraged and some of the markets, and you start seeing the economic vacancy climbing up, you start not being able to make your debt payments. What does this all look like at home when you're seeing this? Like, how does that conversation look like?
Boy, that's a great question. It didn't look very well.
Yeah.
It wasn't fun. I was so disconnected that I wasn't connected at home, that it didn't matter if I was at work or at home. I just was trying to figure out how to fix the problems. And as far as I was concerned, the problem wasn't the home life, because if I could fix the business life and get out of this mess, the home life would ultimately fix itself. But there were things that happened along the way that I really, when I look back, I should have done differently. I could have done differently. Let me give you a quick story. So 2008, I'm sitting in a closing in Cincinnati trying to get a 180 unit deal closed. And I can't close it because the funding's not coming from my office. And we had like $500,000 in earnest money for our side of the deal. And so I finally get my partner on the phone, and my partner says, I don't know how to tell you this. And when your partner tells you that in a situation like this, you kind of go, oh God, what's he gonna do? So what I found out was he moved money from an escrow account into an operating account. Did that on his own, didn't tell anybody about it. He knew when we first went into business, you never do that, right? That's a whole nother story. I get that I dry closed on the deal, which means we closed it. We just didn't fund it. I said I would have it funded by Tuesday. Here's what he told me. He said, I had to move money from an escrow account into the operating account. I moved $500,000, thought I could have the money back, and I can't. I didn't. So I had to go back, re-raise money. Now, I never talked to my wife at the time about business. It was always like, hey, we closed another deal, or got a couple new investors, or we're buying this. But we never talked about business. And I tried to keep her from it because she got too worked up, and I should have been sharing though along the way, and I wasn't. So we go to dinner. That's on a Wednesday. That Friday night we go to dinner, and her and I and my ex-partner and his wife. And on the way home, remember, she knows nothing about what happened on Wednesday or about my business. On the way home, she said, I don't trust him. And so what do I do as a good husband? I go, hey, honey, don't worry. I got this. I have it under control. Don't worry about it. Just providing that security, right? When in essence, I should have said, hey, what don't you trust about him? Tell me about that. What's making you feel that way? And I should have tried to understand what was going on. And so that was one piece. About a week later, my attorney told me the same thing, which is a whole nother story. But this point about her is, that started to lead up to that breakdown in the home life, right? And as things got worse at the company and my stress level went up and my edginess went up and my wondering how I was going to recover from this or what we were going to do went up, I wasn't connected. I wasn't emotionally connected. I wasn't engaged. And I wasn't that husband that I knew I could have been or should have been or was at one time. That just caused that breakdown. So there was a lot of stress, a lot of fighting, a lot of breakdown in the marriage as a result of what was going on in business.
Thank you so much for the transparency again. I can only imagine what's going on in your head as this is unfolding, because as a multifamily investor, we have a fiduciary duty to our investors to treat their money well. If we lose our own money, that's okay. I call that learning. That's tuition that you pay. But when you lose other people's money, that's where it starts hitting home for me. That's the worst thing that can happen. I can only say right now, just imagining all the pain that you're going through, I'm kind of tearing up actually a little bit thinking about all that, from all the different directions that you're getting from your wife, from your investors, from your partners, from soon to be the law, and all of this pressure coming down on you. And maybe could you walk us through how it seems to be that your tenacity is your superpower that helped bring you through a lot of all this? How did you rebound out of this? Like, how are you able to take all of this suffering, right? And all of this bad experience on both personal life and everything that happened with your responsibility to the investors and, the law and all of this. How did you turn that around and get started up again?
Well, it came to the point where we weren't allowed to communicate with our investors anymore. They got shut off on us. Yeah. So there were a few that I did talk to over period of time, and a few that we kind of have stayed in touch, but for the most part wasn't able to connect with them. As far as the home life thing goes, it got worse but all the way to the door, my wife said, we're going to get through this, we're going to make it, we'll get through this together. So the day I got sentenced, or the day I got indicted, and I went to court, we got back in the car and I looked at her and I said, listen, we have two choices here. I could leave you with some money that you'll probably burn through in a year or two, or I could build you a business that you could run and operate and keep you and the kids in the house, and you don't have to go get a job and you can stay. So we agreed that I would go build another property management company. So I took the next 2 years and I built a small residential scattered site property management company that she still actually owns and operates today. And it kept her and the kids in the house, and left a couple of investments with some investors that, worked with her and kind of helped her along while I was gone. So it was really good. I keep looking at this sign behind you, right? Once you become fearless, life becomes limitless. And I can't help but think that what a true to life statement, right? So that brings in that tenacity piece, right? So
100%, yes.
So I built this property management company, and I wound up getting sentenced and going to federal prison in 2013. And I wasn't in prison, but maybe, I don't know, a month, and she said that she was going to leave me and divorce me. So she did, went ahead and divorced me, and it wrecked me. I honestly didn't know how I was going to cope. And there's a saying in prison that says that you have two choices. You can either do the time or let the time do you. Now, pretty dark, it's evil. There's a lot of things that you really just hear about, you think about, but you never think you're going to experience them. And when you start to experience some of that stuff, you wonder how you're going to get through it. So in the gym one day at prison, and this young guy said to me, he said, hey, don't let these people beat you. He said, get that 10 years back. He goes, you have a choice right now. You can work on yourself physically and mentally, or you can let them beat you and ruin your life. He goes, you're a smart guy. You made millions. You can do it again. You'll go home and do it again. And I equate a lot of where I'm at today because of that conversation with that individual, because I started going to the gym and I worked out and I worked on myself mentally and I worked on myself spiritually and I worked on myself emotionally. I went to college. I wound up getting a bachelor's degree in theology. I went to college for 4 years while I was in prison. I went to the gym 5-6 days a week. I wrote 2 books while I was gone. I wrote 2 home study courses, one on multifamily, one on property management. I wrote an ethics course. I taught real estate. I taught ethics in prison for 5 years. I taught Bible studies for 5 years. I was on a community outreach program. I went into the community, told my story to the local colleges and the local area businesses. 40 times we did that. and just giving back, right? Giving back and hopefully making a difference. I know I made a difference in a couple of people's lives based on conversations I had with them. I just finished a paper that we had published in the Business Journal of Ethics that I wrote co-authored with a professor from the University of Minnesota about ethics. And we used my case as a case study. We won a couple of awards with it. And so it's been an interesting transition from where I was to where I'm at now and where I'm continuing to go. So I went from making millions and having millions to losing absolutely everything to coming home in better shape physically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually than I'd ever been in my life. And today I'm working on the financial piece. And it's not important, which is really interesting, right? Is I don't care about it. I don't need to make $1 million. I've done that already. I'm over there. Today it's about just gaining the success back and being at a place where I can give away some knowledge, I can give away some hope, I can help somebody else who might be sitting on the fence. If there's somebody sitting on the fence right now thinking, oh my God, I'm faced with this decision in my business, I'm faced with this decision about which way to go, call somebody, talk to somebody. Don't walk that road alone, right? So it becomes about how do we help somebody else today.
Wow, Mike, thank you so much. Your words are touching both of us.
Very powerful.
Very, very powerful. And just basking in the inspiration that you're shining upon us right now. And I just want to say, it sounds like this is everything you're saying, Mike, is transcending the investing, the financial. It's life advice that comes from experience that is so beyond a majority of us that I really want our listeners to just take a moment, even pause after listening to this and just kind of reflect on how your words are landing. And I want to ask, now that you've had all these experience up to this point in your life, what do you think is your vision for the next few years?
Yeah, my vision is to help other people, is to teach other people how to invest in multifamily, how to operate properties, how to do it ethically, honestly, how to do it with tenacity, how to come back if you stub your toe. Listen, there's things that happen in people's lives. People have baggage. There's things that happen in your past. You know what? It's your past. Doesn't dictate your future, doesn't dictate who you are tomorrow. And you can move through that and move beyond that. And it's a matter of just going and doing it, right?
Yeah, I think one thing that really stuck out to me is that in Chinese, I hear a lot about this because Sophie comes from that discipline of holistic health. And, I hear a lot about, the concept of yin and yang and how there needs to be balance in order for people to really, find what they're truly in. And I find that in times in my life where, it could be parallel to where you were investing in, you were over leveraging in properties and you're very young, you're very expansive and outward and really just trying to grow the business and succeed by expansion and by doing. But then there's always the yin piece. There's the piece of reflection, of rest, of balance and fulfillment, right? That's there also. And without having either of those, if you're on one extreme or the other, then your life is out of balance and things start to spiral out of control and then you don't know why, right? You can't put your finger on it because you're just stuck in patterns that keep repeating over and over again. But if you find yourself, and the reason why I thought that this is a really good example to bring up is that you spent all those years in the yang state, just expanding, and then all of a sudden one day, everything got pulled from you and you had to sit in a place where you were reflective. And that kind of life change is not easy. I mean, I can only imagine what kind of process you were going through, especially after that month, right? After the first month went by and then you talked with your wife and now you're really kind of in this cold place where you can't do what you do, which is to expand, to be young, right? To be expansive. And so now you're sitting there just embracing the yin and trying to figure out what to do and just really focusing on yourself. And so I guess to end this little analogy here, I think based on what you're saying now and based on the conversations you and I have had before, you've found that. You've discovered that there's a balance there where, yeah, you still got to get out there and do stuff, right? That's why we're all here. That's why we're talking about multifamily, and that's why we're talking about mindset and excitement and all that. But there's also the self-reflection piece. There's the balance. There's the perspective as to why are we working this hard? And that's really what I want to tell the listeners, that that's an important key concept to take home. And I think that you've learned that lesson the hard way, but I know you'll never forget it.
Yeah, it's about giving away. It's about giving more back, right?
Yeah.
If you follow Gary Vee at all, he rewrote that book, Jab, Jab, Right Hook. And that is it's so true, it's give, 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 and that's really kind of a place that I wasn't at in my life, years ago, but I'm there now, and it's interesting. So
yeah. Well, we applaud you for that.
Matter of fact, I have a book I'd like to give away.
All right. Well, let's get into that. I think we'll talk about that at the end of the show, because I want to make sure we get our rapid round in. And Sophie, I think, has a few questions for you, and
okay.
Then we'll talk about what you're up to, and we'll go there. So maybe, do you have anything you want to ask?
Yeah.
Final question.
So I'm so curious too. Now that we've heard your amazing story, I want to kind of pull the curtain back a little bit more and just hear about what your day-to-day life looks like, in terms of are there any non-negotiable daily routines? Are there any rituals that you do, anything that you implement in your life currently that keeps you within the balance that Derek was speaking of, within the yin and the yang?
Yeah. So, there are a couple of non-negotiables in my life, right? Time with the Lord. So that's a non-negotiable for me. My physical time, I go to the gym, or I work out, or I do some yoga. It's, I know I have to do that. And, my time that I get to spend educating, or reading, or doing something to expand my own mind a little bit. So those are the things that are really non-negotiable. And beyond that, I spend a lot of time working, and I'm really trying to build relationships with my children today. I have 5 kids, and I have a couple of grandkids as well. And my oldest and her kids, so my grandkids and my oldest daughter and her husband, we have a great relationship. I have 2 middle girls that don't talk to me, and for whatever reason, they're upset about the whole situation about Dad going to prison and that. And so I keep hoping that relationship will come back together. But my younger kids, I get to spend time with. Matter of fact, I'm supposed to take them skiing here this afternoon, so that'll be fun. But it's about building relationships with them today. So.
Mike, I'm pretty confident that there's anyone out there that's tenacious enough to continue to work at getting that relationship rebuilt, it's going to be you. So I wouldn't worry about that too much.
Attention, yeah.
So, all right. Well, Mike, honestly, we could be talking here for ages, and I know that we both have time constraints to this, and we've actually been going for almost an hour now. So time is just flown by for us. So what we do want to do, though, is we want to get into the rapid round. This is the last part of the show. Where we ask everyone all the same questions, and we like to compare the answers that we get from all of our guests, just because it's an interesting thing to do. And I'm an engineer, so that's why.
All right, Mike. So the first question is, what book has had the biggest impact on you, and why?
So, of course, I'll say the Bible first. But if we're going to talk about a real estate book, I'm going to talk about Gary Keller's book, The Millionaire Real Estate Investor, because it's very practical. It talks about systems and processes. And that book I've taught over and over again to multiple investors on how to invest in real estate. It's a great book. So,
agreed, 100%. It's a great place for people to start.
Yeah.
Awesome.
If people wanted to be just like you, what is the first actionable thing that they could do to follow in your footsteps?
Well, you don't want to be just like me, for sure. You want to and especially you want to avoid the pitfalls, just like me. But what I would do is I would work on your tenacity. If you're somebody who takes no hard, you don't like rejection, work on them. Those are things that we can all work on, get out. Make sure that you are talking to people who you're trying to buy a property from or make a sale on a listing or a buyer sale, that you are actually following up and continuing to follow up with those people.
Amazing. Thank you. And what small thing do most people not know about you?
Well, that wasn't a small thing, was it?
Do you speak any foreign languages or?
I play the piano. I taught myself to play the piano. It was something I always wanted to do. And as hard as it was to learn how, and it has been to continue to learn how, if I wouldn't have gone to prison, I wouldn't have done it.
Excellent. Very cool.
And how do you like to unwind and restore your creative juices?
Well, that's two questions there, Sophie. I like to unwind. I'm kind of a Netflix freak. So a few nights a week, I'll catch an hour of Netflix or something before I just kind of veg out.
Nice. And last question, is there something special that you and your family like to do together?
Walk on the beach.
Beautiful. Very nice.
Wonderful.
Well, thank you so much, Mike. We had a pleasure. It was so great to have you on here. And we're just honored that you are sharing your very powerful story with us, with our audience. And I know that if there's someone out there that didn't get anything from that's listened to the whole thing, they probably don't have a heartbeat. I'll be honest with you on this. So now that we know all about you, Mike, can you tell us a little bit more about where people can reach out to you? How can we find out more about Mike Morawski?
Sure, you can go to my website. It is mycoreintentions.com. I actually just released a book too over the last couple of months called Exit Plan, which is your complete guide to multifamily investing and why you need an exit plan before you buy, which is a whole story we didn't talk about at all. But you can go get a copy of that book, free download, a free ebook on my website at mycoreintentions.com/exit plan. And, any questions, anything you need, you can reach me at Mike at My Core Intentions.
Well, Mike, thank you so much for being on the show. And again, such an honor. We really appreciate it. And for those of you out there, if you want to hear more content like this with Mike Morawski, please be sure to like and subscribe wherever you're listening or watching this podcast, whether it's YouTube or SoundCloud, iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify, wherever it is. Please be sure to share this as well with people you think that might benefit from this, because this one had a lot of gems, and I know the world needs a lot more Mike Morawski out there.
Absolutely.
So, yes. Mike, thank you so much for being on.
Thanks. You guys are too kind. Appreciate it. It's been fun.
All right. Take care, everyone. Have a fantastic day.